What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Lifestyle Hub podcast. I'm your host, Jason Grimmer, and on today's episode, we have an incredible guest, Sebastian Bates, founder of the multi-award winning Warrior Academy, UAE's largest martial arts organization, working with 4,000 kids every single week across 3 continents. Also, a former extreme sports athlete with over 500 wingsuit base jumps and skydives, and a professional fighter. This is an episode you do not want to miss. Seb, welcome to the episode.
Thank you for having me on, mate.
Mate, we know each other more or less quite well.
Yeah.
About 2 weeks ago, the roles were reversed. You were actually interviewing me on your podcast.
That is true. Yeah, that was a great episode.
We had a good chat, and I'm going to say I'm much more comfortable being this side of the seat.
Yeah.
And I think there's so much that you actually have to share with us, in particular before the episode when we last spoke. But I think even now, after having come and visit your academy, I think I walked away, I just went home and hammered so many more questions onto my notes for today, being like, we need to probe these other areas. So I'm really looking forward to this. Mate, I touched on it in the intro, but in your own words and in more detail, if someone asked you what you do for a living, how would you answer?
In short, I empower young people around the world. The long version of what I do is I'm the founder of the Warrior Academy, which is a martial arts organization that specializes in character development. So we work with 4,000 children every week across 6 countries, ultimately developing a child's character, giving them higher levels of confidence, conduct, concentration, what we call the 3 Cs, so they go on to live more successful and happy lives as adults.
Incredible. And this is going to form a large base of today's conversation, getting to know what you've built, but also dive deeper into who you are as a person and how you've come to be in such a position and to be able to influence so many. So, mate, thank you again. Let's get straight into it. Where are you from? Tell us a bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. So I'm from the southwest of England. Traveled around a lot when I was younger. We were a military family, so Dad was in and out of the country a lot, but we were moving around. I was born in Bristol. Grew up in Aldershot. And yeah, I mean, growing up for me was just a life filled with adventure. I was in this military environment, military community, so I was watching my dad jump out of planes every week, which probably links to why I started base jumping, I guess, if you kind of join up the dots as you look back. I was doing assault courses, climbing tanks at the weekend, all this sort of stuff. I was in a very busy school. There were 40 kids in my class. I guess that was the first kind of 6 years to 8 years of my life. Then we moved to another area, Wiltshire in the UK, where, a different school, very, very small school, 10 kids in my class, total focus on academics instead, and a very, very different situation I was in. So yeah, moved around a lot when I was younger.
I think I've seen some of your shorts on IG, and you've talking about a lot of the adventures that you'd been on. Yeah. There was one you posted recently. You were on it was a trek. Like a trek for multiple days. Can you dive into that for me for a second?
That was across Africa.
Yes, that was. Yeah. Because I was thinking, wow, like what an experience at such a young age too.
I had a dad who really encouraged adventure from a young age, and I think that, he was away a lot, so he would travel 6 months at a time. He was in the Marines in the Paris. He would go, to war or an exercise, whatever it was. But when he would come back, he would really encourage travel and adventure. And I think I was about 6 or 7 when he was teaching me to abseil off the garage roof and stuff like this, right? And so one of the adventures we went on was the one you're talking about, which is basically when I was about 16, 17, we put our mountain bikes, I think I had to borrow a bike to actually do it, into cardboard boxes, flew them to Morocco, and then we drove about, 5 hours into the desert, and we cycled about 300 to 500 miles across the desert, over the Atlas Mountains, and then down into Morocco, which was just mad. We carried all the water we needed. We ran out of water halfway. We were sleeping in dried out riverbeds. We were chased by farmers for sleeping in the wrong places. It was what I would call type 2 fun, right? You didn't necessarily enjoy a lot of it at the time. But it's character building stuff, right? So yeah, that was just an amazing experience. About 5 of us, they were all ex-army. Great example really of how my dad encouraged adventure from a young age.
Yeah. And definitely it sounds like as we break down your journey from that point, that would have influenced you, quite a lot. So diving into your remarkable journey from being an expat to founding TWA and your life as obviously as an extreme sports athlete, can you talk to me a bit about, being an expat at the age of 18 while studying abroad? How were your experience and how did that moment shape your life to where it is now?
Yeah, right. So I left school when I was 18, and I was a barman at the time. And then I moved to Denmark to study architecture. Studying in the EU, well, studying in Denmark was free for anyone in the EU at that time. That might be a bit more tricky now with Brexit, but essentially I got free university. So I went to Denmark. I'm half Danish.
Okay.
So I went over there, studied architecture. But while I was studying, I was also working every night. So completely different to the experience most Brits have of uni, right? Where it's a lot of partying, all this sort of stuff. You know, I was studying from 8 till 5 in the afternoon, and then I was washing dishes in a steakhouse until 2 a.m. every night. I had one pair of shoes, so I was walking to school uni the next day with wet shoes, just like a really horrible existence. So about a year into that, I spoke to my professor and said, you know, where will I be in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? And so she painted a picture of what my life would be like. And she could have said anything, but the fact that she kind of gave it a limit really threw me off, and I fell out of love with the whole course. And I remember going home that day, and I had a Danish girlfriend at the time, but I went home that day and spoke to a friend of mine and just said, look, I'm leaving uni. And he was in the UK studying in Leeds. And he said, you know what, I'll do the same thing. And we both took a one-way flight to India. So my initial kind of experience of being an expat was a lot of work, a lot of studying, trying to fit into a community that was quite different. A lot of the Danes around me, they were getting grants, getting funding, didn't need to work, all this sort of stuff. So a lot of my friends were from Eastern Europe, they were working hard. My whole kind of intro to expat life was just tough work.
Yeah.
And so I wanted adventure. You know, I was 19 at the time, wanted adventure, one-way flight to India, I had no money. And so I was in India. I had about 400 quid a month or something to live off.
Why India? What was your thought process?
Just the most extreme place you can go.
Okay,
it was like
where is it? Let's go there.
Look at the map. Look at the world map. It's like, what's the most extreme? You know, you look at India, and it's like assault on the senses, right? Exciting food, exciting culture. You know, there's so much to see. It's like a continent, you know, on its own.
Yeah.
And so I looked at it, and I was like, what's the best way to travel across this country with no money? And I figured out sleeper trains was the best way to do it. So instead of booking loads of hotels, I just booked, 4 to 6 weeks of sleeper trains. We'd sleep every night, mostly on sleeper trains.
So a sleeper train would be while you're traveling, you would sleep that night.
Yeah, exactly. So just sleeping on trains mostly, and then really cheap hostels, 5 quid a night hostels, this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And it got to the stage where I realized we were going to run out of money, and I ended up splitting off with my friend at some point, and we could. I realized that I started seeing problems I could solve. And I guess this is where kind of entrepreneurship started for me, right? And entrepreneurship for me is just understanding problems you see in the community and then trying to solve those problems. And one of the problems I noticed was there was one hotel where they had a real monkey problem, right? And so they had no guests because monkeys were coming in, just breaking branches of trees and chucking them down on the restaurant tables and stuff. And so I said, if I can chase away these monkeys, can I stay here for free for a few nights? And he was like, yeah, sure. So I ended up becoming a professional monkey chaser.
There you go.
And the problem with being a monkey chaser, if you're really good at it, it's not a very sustainable career. So the monkeys left. And so with the monkeys leaving, I had to leave as well.
Okay. And so that makes a lot of sense.
So yeah, I carried it on. I went to Asia.
Yeah.
Asia's where I kind of fell in love with Thai boxing.
Okay.
So I was staying in Thai boxing camps while, training hard out there, and I spent about 2 to 3 months on Thai boxing camps out there, training 6 to 8 hours a day, which is amazing. Had a martial arts background at the time, but wasn't teaching martial arts, and so it kind of reignited my passion for martial arts. Thai boxing is obviously a very brutal style of martial arts, very full contact, shin on shin, knee strikes, elbow strikes, very few pads, this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Saved money, I was sleeping in the ring at night. So I had an adventure across Southeast Asia. Bought a motorbike in Vietnam, drove it across the country. This is before Facebook as well. So, the only way I would get a hold of my parents or family would be via email. And so I had a Nokia 3310. There was no way of getting a hold of me. So it's like the golden era of backpacking.
You're properly off the grid.
Yeah, off the grid. Yeah,
that's probably the last stretch before that is not possible anymore.
How hard is it now to be off the grid?
It's almost impossible.
We're always contactable, right? That's right. Yeah, it was really exciting. And I remember that just being, it just felt like such an adventure doing that. And I just wanted to get away from tourists. And, I was pretty much alone the whole time. I just travel alone and just pick up friends as I went in different communities. And I must have gone to about 8 different countries around Southeast Asia and India,
Yes.
and just picked up so many skills. A lot of those skills were skills in creatively solving problems, right? So the same thing I found in India with, I could find a way of staying for free in a hotel. I was doing that in Vietnam a lot, in Thailand a lot. I'd go to the docks or the bus stops, and I'd find tourists to come back and bring them back to the hotel, and then get a few days or a week free accommodation and food for filling up all the rooms, right?
Oh, yeah, good
So I
idea.
did that wherever I went, and it was really a real insight into creating a way of living outside of the norm.
Yes.
So I guess that's quite an interesting expat point of view, right? A lot of people don't necessarily do that. They go down the kind of employed route. But I started looking at things a little bit differently then.
Yeah, the word I used to start this topic was expat, but I don't think that really suits how your journey actually transfolded into, compared to what that looks like today, where someone, like you said, will fly over, they've got a job almost most times preset ready for them, and then it's okay, now I'm in a new environment, new workplace. But you literally jumped right into the deep end and kind of created your own lifestyle from day one, didn't you?
Yeah, and do you know what? I was just chasing adventure more than anything. And it was like, how long can I keep this adventure going, right? How long can I, what do I need to do next? What do I need to do next? And so eventually I realized it was probably unsustainable what I was doing. Yeah. And so I needed to go back to the UK.
What was the time frame on that? How long were you away?
I was away for about 8 to 10 months.
Okay.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then eventually I realized I had to go back to England. But I didn't want to do something office based. I wanted to do something physical. Yeah. I wanted to use my body. I wanted an active lifestyle. And so I started to become a personal trainer in the UK, which was a 6-week course.
Yes.
And my first gig as a personal trainer was taking over a Thai boxing club, which was great because I'd fallen in love with Thai boxing, spent many months doing it, and had a background in martial arts. So, it was a really interesting experience taking over that club. I remember walking in. The club was 16 to 19-year-old young men, mostly, who were just there to let off steam. Like, these guys just wanted to fight. Yeah. They were coming from mostly disadvantaged backgrounds. Drugs, alcohol, substance abuse, domestic abuse, sleeping rough a lot, unhealthy relationships. A lot of that was dictated by their environment, which made it even harder for them. But they were in this kind of cycle, of never being able to escape that. And so I remember coming in, I was only a couple of years older than a lot of them, really. And I noticed that I had to earn their respect. And so the first kind of few months, when I was training them, or at least the first year, everything I asked them to do, I was doing as well. If I asked them to do 100 press-ups or this grueling circuit or tough sparring, I'd be doing it with them. Yeah. And gradually they started to see that, right? It was like, okay, now we'll listen to him. And so once I knew they were listening to me, I realized that what they needed to get out of the situation they were in, the true power of martial arts for them, wouldn't be martial arts itself. It was the impact martial arts would have on their character, right? And so the traditional styles I had studied before, like Taekwondo, which has a really strong kind of moral compass attached to it, and the tenets of Taekwondo, all this sort of stuff. It was like, how can I bring that traditional ethos into an environment which is just about self-defense and fighting for these guys, right? Yes. And they were already handy guys, like they could already handle themselves. Yeah. They were doing that the weekend, every single weekend. I can imagine. And so it was like, what they needed was a moral compass. They needed a positive male role model. They needed someone who could give them, a direction in life outside of where they were and teach them how to make better decisions, more positive decisions. And so, it was asking them to take their shoes off as they came in. Initially, that was like, they would kick them off and be upset with me. And then it was asking them to bow as they came in. And then eventually calling each other sir. It was like we were changing the moral fabric of their identities. And it really struck me, how gradually over time I saw the decisions they make more healthy. They didn't go out the weekend. They didn't make all the unhealthy decisions they were making around the relationships or the addictions they may have had. They started to prioritize their health over everything else. And I'm sure you can relate to that with some of the clients you've got, right? Definitely. It was like the influence I was making was more, changing the decisions they were making so they can have a more positive outlook on life. Yes. 12 months later, we had about 15 national champions from that group. Jeez. And it was amazing. I was taking these young men who just wanted to fight, and we were giving them a reason to exist beyond just the kind of physical. That's right. And it was like a complete 180 with their characters. Yeah. And so that's really when I realized, you know, if I could just work with them when they weren't 17 or 18 and they had already gone through all these difficult challenges of their life, I'd work with them when they were 4 or 6 or 8, you know, planted those seeds of a moral compass and a black belt character, we call it, then where would they be now? You know, and so that's when I wanted to start the first kids warrior academy club.
Well, yeah, it's impressive because, you know, I did wonder where it first actually originated from, but I would never have thought it would have come from, you know, you walking in as a trainer initially, just new to the industry, and then being able to have so much foresight into what could be done. Obviously, your time away helped with that, right? When you were over in Asia, you're able to see and paint that picture. Do you think that step was essential then in that case?
Do you know what? I think a lot of the time, it's one of those situations where I mentor about 300 business owners a year, and they always say, you know, I need to find my passion, I need to find my purpose. And I kind of see it like your passion or your purpose finds you. You know, if you go out and hunt for it all the time, it's really hard to find, but it finds you, right? So when I look back, it's easy for me to say that was my purpose. But at the time, I just wanted to do something physical, and I wanted to, you know, be a personal trainer and, you know, do Thai boxing and teach Thai boxing. Yeah. It's only when you start to realize what you enjoy doing, where you're making the most impact, and what from a business point of view makes the most sense, that you can start to, you kind of go down the rabbit hole of different things, right? And so it started to evolve, and I think your purpose evolves over time. Yes. You know?
You've mentioned before about you being bullied as a kid. Talk to me a little bit about the experience that was for you and the influence of your decision to obviously create the TWA from there. And you talk about it a lot now as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I've written a book about bullying called Not a Victim as well. And so bullying for me was, I mentioned the transition from the big school to the small school, right? So I was in a school with a military type school with 40 kids in the class. There was no discipline. And one year we had 13 teachers come and go. Like if you had walked into that class, you would see kids jumping on the tables. It was just carnage, right? Yeah. So up until the age of 6 or 7, my grades were awful. You know, academically, I was completely failing. My parents made a decision to move. We moved about 3 hours away. We found a private school, not a particularly expensive one. It was a fairly cheap private school, but it was really focused on discipline and academics. It was an 18th century building. The headmaster and headmistress were in their late 80s, early 90s. Oh. So, you know, they had been in the war. So it's like old school, yeah. And probably exactly what I needed from a discipline point of view and to help me with the academics. The problem with that is, you know, I was failing academically, so I was punished for that. But I was also in an environment where I had 10 other kids in the class who were from very entitled backgrounds. And I had come from a state school with 40 kids in the class who had nothing. And so there I was in this situation where I was just immediately isolated as the new kid who came from a very different background from them. And so, you know, my parents didn't drive the same cars as them. They didn't go on the same holidays as them, all this sort of stuff, right? Yeah. You know, and so that isolation with a very small group meant that I was on my own a lot. The bullying was, you know, initially, I was only about sort of 8, 9, 10 at this time. The bullying lasted about 3 years. It started off kind of psychological, then it was more isolation, not being invited to things. Then it became physical, to the point where I was, you know, regularly just kind of beaten up in school, you know, pinned down and kicked and this sort of stuff. And, you know, I remember reaching breaking points. So during this time, I was studying martial arts, right? So my parents were like, right, we need to build his confidence. So they put me into a martial arts club. And, you know, I remember looking at the martial arts, the kind of black belts in the class, thinking I need to be just like them to kind of get over this, right? And I guess gradually it built my confidence up, but it takes time. One of the things that I find with bullying is, you know, for you to actually make a change in your life, like anything in life, I think it's all about tolerances. You have to reach a point where you've reached your tolerance of something, and then there's a breaking point. And so for me in that situation, it was like, I got to this stage where I had reached enough courage to kind of match the uncomfortability that I was experiencing. And so at that point, you know, I kind of, you know, I was playing football then with something in this kind of cement building with, you know, cement floor. And one of the boys saw me running with the ball, just kicked my feet, and I went over, my head hit the floor. And I jumped back up and immediately just hit him back. And, you know, he was on the floor, and the whole group were just shocked that the ringleader had suddenly been knocked down on the floor. And I was shocked too. I think anyone had stood up to the guy before. But it changed the pecking order immediately. And so what then happened was I realized, you know, that if you're able to stand up to someone, you can then change what, you know, your situation. And so it all came with me reaching my tolerance level of bullying. And I think that was the breaking point for me, which then prevented the bullying from continuing, basically.
Okay. Yeah, it's something that happens quite a lot now, and it seems to be almost more and more common, unfortunately, but I think it's something that people are much more aware of.
Yeah.
And they're able to try to deal with.
Do you know what? The bullying is just, it's so misunderstood by parents. And I've worked with some of the world's leading behavioral psychologists on this, like Dr. Demartini, and, I've traveled the world studying this stuff, and we've worked with over 30,000 children around the world. And it's, for me now, it's just so clear, but parents always approach bullying reactively rather than proactively. Yes. So the way I see it is, your child's going to have to learn to cross the road, right? The danger out there is a car coming. The driver could be on his phone, so it's down to your child to be empowered enough to spot the danger and cross effectively with skills you teach them. So in this situation, the driver's the bully, the road is the environment, the school, whatever it is, and your child has within their control the ability to transition through that quickly and safely, right? And so as parents, though, we don't prepare them for it. Instead, we just act reactively when something goes wrong. And so the way I see it is, as parents, we need to approach bullying expecting it to happen, teaching our children how to approach it, empowering them with the skills they need to overcome it on their own, because the reality is we're not going to be there when it happens. In most cases of bullying that I've seen, it's the child going through it, rarely telling the parent they're actually going through it through shame or guilt or whatever it is. You've got this breakdown of communication that happens, and then ultimately parents act surprised when it does happen. And so they're reactive. And we know when we're reactive to something, emotion goes up, logic goes down, we make worse decisions, right? We go into school and we shout at the teacher or tell the other parents off, or we mentor the children the wrong way through it.
Yes.
Whereas if we're proactive, we can help them transition through it really quickly. And so I noticed this, drawing on my own experiences and interviewing lots of parents. So I read a book called Not a Victim. And we've got a really alternative approach to it. A lot of schools, even here in Dubai, they say they're a bully-free school. It's impossible to be a bully-free school. It's an uncomfortable part of the human conditioning, right? Which is something we do as humans when we're kind of learning how to socialize. And so, the whole point of this book is to help parents from two angles. If your child's going through bullying, you can flick it straight over into the middle. And within 2 weeks, you've got a 6-step program which helps you mentor your child through bullying, which has been really effective for a lot of parents. On the flip side of that, we've got parents approaching this proactively, where they want to learn why bullying occurs, teaching their child the perspective of understanding that bullying is this flow of negative energy. It's not the bullies are a bad person. It's just a case of understanding how to kind of process it, right? And then giving your child the skills so they can actually transition through it very quickly on their own. And so, that book's managed to help a lot of people through it. So, one of the things I was interviewed on Virgin Radio last year, and I've got a very alternative approach to bullying. Like I said, it's one of those things where I feel like, and I truly believe this, you can go through bullying and it's got the ability to make or break your child's character. So I interviewed, 10 incredibly successful people as case studies for the Not a Victim book, who attest the success in their life they've experienced to the bullying they've gone through. And so it's our job as parents to make sure that our child goes through bullying, but it actually benefits them. And so, when I was asked on Virgin Radio, what message do I have for the bullies in my life? My message was thank you. And it was like, a lot of parents are pretty confused by that. But if you truly understand bullying, if you truly understand human nature, and you understand that we have more control than we realize to process things and to leverage our experiences to make sure that we experience post-traumatic growth, rather than experience something negatively, then these things actually have a chance to benefit us in the long run.
It's a powerful way to look through that, because I think that's not typically the most go-to viewpoint, is it? So
it's like anything in life, right? Like anything traumatic. These things are happening to me. It's what a disaster. It's rather than trying to find the nugget of gold that you're going to get through going something difficult, right?
Yeah.
Who was it that I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was like, if you were going to design the person you want to be, what would you give them? Like, what experiences would you give them? If you need someone who's resilient, has got grit, who's passionate about something, would you just give them an easy life? No, you chuck them loads of challenges, loads of horrible, traumatic things to go through, right? But you put them in a situation where they can process it, where they've got the mentoring to understand it.
Yes.
And then they would leverage those experiences to benefit their life and other people.
Yes. Yeah, it's very wise and makes a lot of sense. And on that, it also kind of leads into the next point with you overcoming something quite personal and quite physical that you'd gone through. And it began right as you took the walk down the road of extreme sports. Talk to us a little bit about that. You were traveling the world, involved in extreme sports. What were some memorable moments before we touch on perhaps the not so memorable?
Extreme sports.
Yeah. When you were involved in it.
I guess I have to probably explain what I mean by extreme sports. So I started skydiving. Pardon me. I started skydiving when I was about 22. The War Academy was doing really well. We had lots of clubs going on. I was teaching martial arts full time, and at the weekend, every day I wanted to pursue extreme sports. Where that came from, could have been my dad, not too sure. Watching him jump out of planes, maybe planted the seed there, and having that adventurous spirit, right? So I really started to lean into it. I did my first jumps. It was an amazing community I was around. You're just in a flow state. When you jump out of a plane, for anyone who's done it, have you done a skydive before?
Never. It's on the list.
Right, cool. We'll do it straight after this, shall we? So, when you do a skydive, you're just in this flow state, right? And you're not thinking about your emails. Yeah. You're not thinking about any stress you've got. You're just in this incredible, you're just absorbed by the experience. And then you're just buzzing for the next 10 days from it. It's just an incredible experience. And so, like anything I tend to start something and get really into it. And then, I found myself every single weekend skydiving. I started doing 100 jumps, 150 jumps. I'd go away to America and do 50 to 80 jumps in 1 week in Florida or, California or whatever it is, or even Spain or Italy. And so I started getting massively into the community. And then the next kind of phase for that was base jumping. It was like, well, wingsuiting and base jumping, all this sort of stuff. So I started wearing a wingsuit and jumping out of planes. And with wingsuiting, you really feel like you're experiencing human flight. For the first time, you're, rather than just falling straight down like a rock, you're now gliding and you're able to kind of look at clouds and, dive through clouds or go around clouds. And you're using the sky as your playground. And you can often have several minutes of flight versus, 40 to 60 seconds in a normal skydive. And so, but then you get comfortable doing that, right? Like 100 wingsuit skydives, I was comfortable doing that. And people say, how can you base jump? And I'm like, well, you can get used to anything. Once you start something, it becomes normal after a while, right? And so, then I got into base jumping. And so, the next progression for me was I flew to America. I flew to Idaho, Salt Lake City, Twin Falls is where I ended up, to the Prime Bridge. And in 10 days, I did 100 jumps off the Prime Bridge. Some of them were at night because we had to learn to jump at night. Some of them were very early morning. We were doing at least kind of 10 to 12 jumps a day.
How does the body handle that?
The body, yeah. So this is interesting. You can prepare yourself as much as you can for your first base jump. But you're always going to be standing on the edge and your body's going to be shouting and screaming at you to stop, right? And it's like, I used to have a mentor when I started doing a lot of cliff jumping. He would say to me, if you can't stand on the edge of a cliff on one foot and slow your breathing down so your legs stop shaking, then you're not ready to jump. And it's funny because if I was to stand here right now and just stand on one foot, I'd be able to do it. But on the edge of a cliff with a 1,000-foot drop, suddenly becomes a little bit harder, right? Yeah. Your sort of sympathetic nervous system takes over and your body's like got its mind of its own. It starts shaking. And so there you are, just shaking. And people experience this with all sorts of stuff. Anything that whether you're going into your first fight or you're doing a big speech or whatever it is, right? That's right. Your body starts to kind of take on a mind of its own. And so when you're responding to that, it's I kind of leverage the things I learned through martial arts, breathing techniques, and this sort of stuff. And it's like you can slow down your mind to really just focus on what you're doing. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you've got to make a decision to jump. And there's a point at which you're leaning off the edge of a jump, a bridge or a cliff, whatever it is, where you're still attached to the cliff, but your body's too far forward. And it's like, now you've made the jump. There's no going back, but you're still on the cliff. And so in that moment, so many things rush through your head. And then as you fall off, you've got what we call dead air. So whatever position you leave the cliff is the position you stay in pretty much until you get enough wind resistance so you can move your body. At that point, your stomach sinks. It's a very, very quiet experience. Like a skydive is very noisy. The door opens, loads of wind, then you jump out. It's chaotic, right? But a base jump, you're standing in complete silence. You might have a few friends around you just waiting for you to go. And then when you lean forward and jump, silence, and then suddenly the wind starts picking up, your stomach goes, and then you reach behind you, you pull your parachute, and out pops, hopefully, your parachute, and you're off to safety, right? It's down to drills. A lot of this is down to drills, like anything. You look at martial arts, you learn to keep your guard up. You learn to throw a jab, then a cross, then a left hook, whatever it is, right? You learn how to block. You learn your footwork. You learn how to respond to certain things. You don't just jump into the arena. You do your drills so many times. So before you do a base jump, your skill acquisition needs to be so high through skydiving to the point where you've just practiced the same thing all the time. You're so used to reaching for your parachute. You're so used to putting your body in a certain position. You're so used to landing a canopy that it's kind of second nature, because it's very hard to think about, fine motor movements when you're in that high stress environment. Yeah. But again, you get used to anything, right? And so there I am jumping off bridges, used to that very quickly. Within a few weeks, I was used to doing that. Then I did small cliffs. I was used to that. And so I started flying to Italy to do wingsuit base jumping. And within Italy, I was suiting up my wingsuit for the first time, and you're kind of on the edge of a cliff. And wearing a wingsuit is like wearing a straitjacket, right? It's your arms go in, you zip the arms up, and then when you lean forward and jump, it's just the most incredible feeling, because rather than being in a skydive where you're basically gliding across this map, instead you're gliding across forests and mountains and stuff, and then you get used to that, right? And it's like, now I'm used to wingsuit base jumping. And so now the next thing is terrain flying, where instead of just trying to get away from the cliff, which is safe, you try and go close to the cliff. So we would jump down, follow the cliff along, follow the forest along, get as close as we possibly could, and then move out, flare out, slow down your descent and pull your parachute. And so there I was starting to do terrain flying. There's probably about 20 of us at the time, maybe 30 of us, maybe even up to 40 around the whole world doing this to that level. So I was part of this kind of extreme sports cult in a lot of ways, where people were risking their lives every day to pursue human flight. And it was really a scientific process where they were really studying. People were even making their own suits. It was incredible. And you had so many different people from all sorts of walks of life doing it, who just had this huge passion for human flight. And, there I was running the business at the same time. For 3 or 4 months a year, I was traveling. I'd spend 2 months in the mountains in Italy. Just, you talk about some of the great moments. It was stuff like 6-hour hikes with your friends up a mountain where you're just talking, and then, there's 5 of you on the edge of a cliff and you're just suiting up. You're waiting for a gap in the, in the clouds to go, because you're just above the cloud level. And as soon as the gap goes, then you jump and you're diving through. And, one example was we would 5 of us jump off and go through a waterfall on the side of a cliff. That's how close we were going. Flare out, and then, finish up in a bar in Switzerland somewhere. And, you just share such a bond with these people. The camaraderie there is so hard to find. Like, I experienced in the Royal Marines when I was younger, and I experienced it within martial arts to a degree, but that's still an individual sport. And I guess, wingsuit base jumping is as well. But the time you spend and the experience you have are so strong. But like everything in life, there's a balance, right? And so with all that beauty that comes from those incredible experiences, comes the dark side of base jumping, which is death and people having accidents. And so, to come to the kind of the point at which I had a base jumping accident, for me, it was my 7th jump of the day in 17th July in 2014, sorry. And, it was the 7th jump of the day. I was jumping all week with my friend from Portugal, who's a great jumper. And I was like, right, he left and I carried on. So I did 7 jumps solo across the Via Ferrata in Switzerland, which is basically, you've got this climbing route on the edge of a cliff. People clip themselves in, they wear helmets, all this sort of stuff. We would just kind of run past them as they're doing this. We'd get to the deck and you kind of suit up, jump off. And it was a very short jump. You only have about 40 seconds of flying. Come down, follow the cliff along, go past the reference point, which is kind of forest on the left, bear right into open space. You've only got 5 seconds to kind of achieve this. Slow down your descent and pull the parachute out. So I did that, and every single jump I get a little bit closer to the forest, a little bit closer, just really, really carefully. And seventh jump of the day, followed it all fine, pull the parachute out, bang, parachute, the canopy opens, fine, right? But I'm in this straitjacket, and so I need to unzip my wings so that I can effectively steer. So when I look to my left wing, I try and unzip it, but the zipper's jammed. I look in front of me, and I'm going straight towards power lines. I managed to free my right arm, try again with the left zip, it's still jammed. And so I realize I've got to make an emergency turning. And so I use my right hand to grab onto the rear left riser, pull it down. The canopy does a 180. But because of how fast the emergency turning was, the whole canopy just collapses. And so I'm 50 foot above the ground. I basically drop with no canopy all the way to the ground. It's like 5 stories. It's like falling out of a 5-story window. My feet hit the ground first. My head bounces off the floor, which then makes me go straight back up before I collapse again. I stay conscious. I don't know how, but everything's kind of broken. So both feet broke, both legs broke, both ankles broke. The tendons on my left foot exploded off my foot, and kind of shriveled up the leg. And so I was just lying there in the middle of nowhere in this valley in Switzerland. Somehow I had survived, and I was just thinking to myself, is anyone going to find me here? And fortunately, some French climbers, they found me. It took 3 hours for the ambulance to come. They couldn't get a helicopter up there. Eventually, this kind of helicopter taxi came, and they managed to get me to the back of it. This taxi came. And then I was finally given morphine by the time I got back to Interlaken Hospital. And the doctor said to me, after a while, the next day, he looked at the x-rays and it was just blurry, like both feet just blurry, especially the left foot, where the bone, the heel bone exploded. So there were shards of bone all around the leg, all this sort of stuff. Just like an explosion going off of my feet. And so, he looked at me and he said, I'd never walk again. This is it, right? And I managed to get myself back to the UK within kind of 3 or 4 days. My dad actually flew over. He drove me back. As I was driving back to the UK, I'm injecting morphine, injecting blood thinners into my legs. That's when I found out he didn't like injections. It's quite funny, really. So I realized I had to do it myself. And got back to the UK hospital. They performed surgery on me straight away. Doctor after surgery, the surgeon came in and he was like, I had a friend of mine there as well. He just came to visit. The doctor said, you're never going to walk again. That's it. And I remember thinking, like, when am I going to jump again? Like, obviously, I'm going to walk again. What's this going on about? Doctors have their own beliefs and systems, and they have to kind of cover their own backs. I feel they've got to give you negative kind of outcomes just in case you expect something amazing, yes, some miracle to happen. But for me personally, it was very much a case of I'm going to jump again, and within kind of a few days after that, I was back at home. I had to move in my parents' house. I had to move into to live in the sofa bed downstairs. And I just kind of lost everything. My business was running. I had someone who could teach classes to cover me for at least a couple of months. But in 2 months, I had to be back there again, and so, the rehab that I was going through initially was just like, how am I going to control the pain? Because there was just so much pain initially, still. And then gradually I started kind of putting weight on the broken legs. I started using crutches. I could do some upper body work. I was doing whatever I could. I was using a spiky ball on the bottom of my feet because the nerves are completely gone. So the left foot in particular, I couldn't feel it at all. It died somewhere in Switzerland. It was like it didn't belong to me. So I was trying to bring the nerves back to life with that. And then essentially, bit by bit, started to slowly make progress. And I was teaching martial arts for about a year on crutches. And I'd get crutches there, then I'd kind of sit down. I try and teach most of the class sitting down. And so eventually, kind of about 13, 14 months into it, I was able to walk without crutches, but I was, limping. So this really, really heavy limp. And my progress completely plateaued, just stopped progressing. It was like whatever I did, nothing was working. I was just in so much pain from the arthritis. And I was referred to what I call the Alamo of rehab, which was the pain clinic, they call it, right? And so, got to the pain clinic and they're like, look, your progress has stopped and you're in lots of pain and we need to give you a reality check. this is how you're going to be the rest of your life. So I was about 25 years old. I was told that you're never going to, walk without a limp. You're going to experience arthritic pain every day for the rest of your life, the way you're experiencing it, right? It would take me an hour in the morning to get over the pain. If you have kids, playing with your kids is going to be tricky. Going for dog walks, if they're 15 minutes long, fine. Any more than that, forget it. And so I was in this situation where I was like, losing all hope. What do you do from that situation, right? You're 25. I just felt like I just ruined my life. And so I felt like I got to this point where I'd ruined my life. What else do I have to lose? And so I started jumping again.
Oh. No way. There's no way. I'm sitting here thinking, how are you with me? And I've seen you train. So Seb trains in the gym that I'm working at with a good friend of mine, Tom. And I've seen you push. I would never, ever have thought to that extent that your body had been through that kind of trauma. So you started jumping. How?
Started jumping
How
again.
did we end up there?
So, I throughout the rehab, I got to kind of give you perspective on this as well, because while the whole physical rehab was difficult, the kind of psychological side of it was really bad as well. I was part of this extreme sports group. And so what I was watching was every single month, another friend dying. I had 15 friends die in about 18 months during rehab. And so, part of me was like, I didn't want them to die for no reason. I wanted to continue jumping because this is what we believed in. My life was over. At that point, it was like, I've got nothing to lose, which is a really dangerous place to be in. Even though I had an amazing girlfriend, an amazing family, all supporting me, and an amazing business where I was making an impact on lots of lives, the fact that I had lost the chance to do, to have a physical life is just, for me, it was just devastating. And so, I didn't want the fact that 15 of my close friends had died and, that to kind of stop me. And I wanted to go out there and continue that. And I missed the camaraderie. I missed the experience. And so, I started being very selective. I went to Italy and I jumped off cliffs which were overhanging water. So if I wanted to land in water, I could do that. And then, sooner or later, my wife was pregnant with our first child. And a few months before the birth, I was in Sweden, hiking through snow to get to an exit point with duct tape around my leg to try and hold it together so that I could, have a bit more stability when I land. And I was on the edge of this cliff and on the edge of this exit point. And, the winds picked up. It took 2 hours to get up. And so eventually, I hiked 2 hours back down again. I didn't jump. And I think the winds kind of saved my life, because that was such a risky jump to do in the ice, in those winds, with an injury. And then, a few months after that, I'm in the same hospital on the same date as the accident, 17th July.
No way.
3 years later.
Yeah.
And my daughter, my wife gives birth to my daughter at exactly midnight, like on exactly the same day. And it's just 3 years after the accident. And I remember holding her, this tiny living thing in my arms, and just being like, if I carry on the way I'm going, she won't have a dad. That's the reality. Like, there's no way she's going to have a dad. And I realized I was living very selfishly, while I wanted to experience all these things in life, it was at what cost? So then I die and then she doesn't get to experience life. And I realized that my job was to empower her, to live an incredible life without me. And I kind of had this idea in my head that she would live without me. And that sounds really weird from a parent's point of view, but I just seen so much death, I think, and for such a young guy, and I've been surrounded by it and been through such a traumatic experience. I guess the first few years of her life was just about empowering her to live without me. And so, yeah, she's fiercely independent now. It's crazy. But I realized, holding her and going through this like life-changing moment of creating human life, that as much as I wanted to empower her to live without me, I realized that that's what I wanted to do for other kids as well. And it was like, how can I help young people face life's obstacles, get over some of the traumatic things they go through without the help of their parents? Because ultimately we have to do that alone, right? Yeah. And so I wanted to do that for my daughter, but also for kids around the world. And so within a few years, within 3 years, we went from an organization with 500 kids to, in just the countryside of England to being in 6 countries with 4,000 kids every week, and a team of 60 managing the whole operation, and a global charity that, mentors 2,500 orphans every single week, and, pulls them out of slums and homeless shelters and all that sort of stuff. And so that all stems from these traumatic experiences that you go through, you know?
So it all, as soon as you got back into the driving seat and you put aside, I guess what you said is your selfish endeavors, the business absolutely flourished and you're able to channel all of that energy.
People say, you know, when you have kids, it slows down your business. And it was the complete opposite for me. You know, as soon as I had kids, it was like jet fuel. It was like I needed to, you know, grow up and use my life to build something which they can benefit from, right? I had a family to look after. And so, yeah, the business just, you know, within 3 years, we were just all over the world. You know, a complete U-turn of what we were doing.
Seb, you're big on personal growth. What strategies do you use to maintain a positive and growth-orientated mindset? Because that would have had to have happened at that point.
What strategies do I use? I guess there's the mindset element, and then there's the practical element, right, of actual techniques and stuff.
Yes.
From a mindset element, I try and seek uncomfortability a lot.
That's safe to say. You just spoke about over. Like, how many dives did you end up doing of uncomfortable environments?
Yeah, 500
plus
skydives. Yeah,
crazy.
And so I think there's a voice that goes on in our head when we're experiencing something uncomfortable, and which kind of tells us to stop, right? And so, you know, whenever I hear that voice, for me, it's like an indication that I need to do something. I need to push myself a little bit further. It's like, you know, the way I see it is we're constantly listening to a voice. We're constantly listening to ourselves. We're constantly being coached, you know, by your own thoughts. And those thoughts are either positive or negative, but we've got control over them. And so for me, it's really important that you give yourself the right messaging. And I think that, you know, if you promise yourself you're going to do something, you don't do it, then ultimately what you're telling yourself is that you're not reliable, you're not trustworthy. And so people look at me and they're like, well, how do you do those things with base jumping or professional fighting or business, whatever it is? And, you know, how do you grow someone's confidence? How do you build someone's self-esteem? And the ultimate way of doing that is teaching yourself that you're a reliable person. So when you say you're going to do something, you do it. And I just obsess over that concept, right? It's like if I say I'm going to do something, I do it. And I guess if you look at the rehab I was doing, right? Even though the rehab felt hopeless for 2 years, I wrote a daily list of what I was doing on a piece of paper. And I'd always say to myself, whatever's on the piece of paper is getting done, even if it's uncomfortable, even if I don't believe it's working. You know, you set a plan out for yourself. If you say you're going to do it, you're going to do it. And it's all about winning little battles every single day. And that has such a massive knock-on effect, a compounding effect. And it's the same thing I do with other people. So if I say to a friend I'm going to do something, it's happening. You become a reliable person for other people, but ultimately you're watching yourself become more reliable. And so that has a massive impact on your confidence, which then translates to you having the courage to go and take bigger risks and just put yourself out there. So I think from a confidence point of view, that's my approach. I think a lot of people struggle with imposter syndrome.
Yes.
I think that's one of the biggest things, right? Have you experienced imposter syndrome?
I mean, it sounds stupid because I feel stupid saying it because I don't feel like I'm at that point in my career yet where I potentially think I should feel that way, but I don't know if there is a measure of that. But sometimes I feel like I have everything laid out in front of me, but I'm my own worst enemy. Like I'm the one stopping myself, and I have so many people be like, do this, do that. So I'm sure it is something that a lot of people face quite regularly, isn't it?
Yeah, it's one of the biggest reasons people don't do something, right? And so when you're looking at personal growth, the biggest stumbling block is imposter syndrome. Some niggling thought in our head saying we can't do it. Now that could draw on experiences of you failing at, lots in the past and proving to yourself that you're not trustworthy. So then I go back to the drawing board and be like, what are 3 things that you can easily do and start building and compounding those little wins, like I said.
So it's not too late.
Exactly.
If you've not had such a successful track record of following through with things.
Yeah. You need to reset and reinvent yourself.
If you're listening now, you can get out the
draw a line in the sand. Yeah. Draw a line in the sand. Find something easy that you know you can accomplish. Boom, you've done it. Next thing. And so, we'll talk about habits and stuff if you like. But in terms of imposter syndrome, the way I look at it is, it's a bit like you're in a car and you want to test the car, bring it to its, full speed, max speed, right? And so there are several gears you need to work through to get there. For a lot of people, they rev the engine a bit, they don't really make it fast enough in order to warrant changing gears, and they go back down, right? They go a little bit, go back down. They don't actually accelerate to the full capacity. And so the way I see it is you want to basically rev that car as much as you can until you're in the red, and then you change gears, like bang. As soon as you get to the red, that's an indication that you're ready for the next stage. And so I kind of see a lot of what goes on in our life as that, that kind of metaphor. Yeah. And so a lot of people, they'll push it too far. They'll push something too far. They do stuff that's outside of their comfort zone, but outside of their performance zone as well. And they end up revving the car till the engine light comes on, right? So their car's revving, the engine light comes on, and now they've broken the car. They have to go back, and now they're in this comfort zone, which is now shrinking. And so that typically means that you need to upskill before you accelerate again. Learn more skills, whatever it is. But I think a lot of it comes down to how we look at the comfort zone, right? If you look at the comfort zone, people look at it in a way that's too simple, I think. And so you imagine a circle of the comfort zone, right? People say you want to leave the comfort zone, that's where all the good stuff happens, which is true. But for a lot of people, they leave the comfort zone, they enter the high performance zone, which is doing something that is within your ability but feels comfortable. That feels uncomfortable, sorry. So within your ability but feels uncomfortable. So they grow from that experience. Go back to the comfort zone expands, right? On the flip side of that, they push it too far. They go into the hyper-anxiety stage where something's outside of their ability and it's uncomfortable. It's a negative experience. So they go back to the comfort zone and that shrinks. Yes. And so when I look at parenting, I see parenting like this balance of protection and empowerment, like I spoke about, right? A lot of parents overprotect. They keep their kids in that comfort zone. Whereas a lot of parents push their kids too far into that hyper-anxiety stage. And so they're in this position where they're not actually perfecting the balance. And so typically with parenting, you've got that kind of approach where you've got someone, typically the kind of masculine figure in the family, pushing the empowerment side, and the feminine is typically kind of protecting. And between them, you've got this perfect balance, which brings them into high performance. So if you look at that, how you internalize that yourself, it's finding things that are within your ability or should be, but constantly learning to push yourself into that stage, feeling uncomfortable, but making that a learned process so you repeat it. I think a lot of our work with young people is just encouraging them to understand that feeling uncomfortable is just a way of life. Yes. It's just what you should be doing, right? If you're truly about empowering young people, then you need to be getting them into situations that are uncomfortable, right? It's like, it's not about giving them participation medals where they win every time. It's not about wrapping kids in bubble wrap. It's not about avoiding failure. It's about preparing kids for adult life, which is tough, where they experience failure, but it's an indication that they're doing the right thing. And so, I think we need that approach. And that all starts from how we are parenting young people to then become adults, right?
Yes. Very valuable advice, Seb. And as we wrap up today with today's episode, what exciting projects or goals do you have for the TWA coming up?
What have we got coming up? So right now we mentor 2,500 kids every single week in developing countries. That started with a homeless shelter in Nairobi with 30 homeless kids. We're helping them transition into full-time education through our character development program. From that club of 30 homeless kids, there's now 2,500 children in orphanages and slums in Nepal, Kenya, India, Sri Lanka. We're hoping to grow that to 10,000 orphans over the next 12 months. We want to be in every single continent doing what we're doing. And right now I'm in the process of getting 40 passports for a lot of these kids in developing countries to fly them all to Dubai to compete in the Warrior World Championships, where we're going to have several hundred, there should be about 500 people there here in Dubai, all competing from around the world. I think we've got about 5 or 6 countries flying in, which would just be an amazing experience. When you take a child from an orphanage and you in a developing country or a slum in Mumbai, for instance, and you train them up for 6 months, you give them this experience, it really ignites a whole passion in the whole orphanage. And now we've got children in, the Himalayas and Nepal training at 5 a.m. every single day to prepare for this competition. And so what you do is we're giving people this kind of reason to really push themselves and to grow. And so that's what we're really excited about. That's the next big thing coming out. We're gonna make a documentary out of that as well. So stay tuned for that one.
Incredible, mate. There's so much coming up for people to stay tuned and look forward to. That leads me to our Lifestyle Hub golden question. What do you think is the key to living a happy and fulfilling lifestyle?
A happy and fulfilling lifestyle. Okay, this might be a bit alternative. Stop chasing happiness. the ultimate way to find fulfillment is to stop chasing happiness. We as humans think that happiness is the goal. It's not the goal. Fulfillment is the goal. And for me, fulfillment comes from service to other people. We're rarely as fulfilled as when we're serving other people. When we serve ourselves, it feels great, right? And ultimately that leads to happiness. But happiness is just this fleeting human emotion that we experience for a moment, and you can't pin your whole life around that. If I look at entrepreneurship, I look at entrepreneurship as exploring your full potential to serve mankind and to explore, how you can solve problems in your environment to help other people. And so I would look at a lot of people in Dubai, and I would say they exist to make money. A lot of people are out here in Dubai. They're economic expats. They really enjoy the fact that they're earning more. They want a business that's really financially successful. But when they get there, then what? Right? It gets to a point where your business is doing really well, you're making multiple 7 figures, and you're not fulfilled, and you're just constantly want the next thing. Right. And so, I mentor about 300 business owners a year, and one thing I always say to them is exist for a reason beyond making money. Have a reason out there that you're passionate about, that really is your reason for existing. You might have the worst financial year ever, but it could be the best year on record for making an impact. And so, for us, that's the Bates Foundation and the charity work we do. And if you really want to find fulfillment in life, that's the route to go down. It's not chasing happiness.
Love that. Thank you, Seb. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your inspiring journey, your insights, and the incredible work you do through the Warrior Academy. It's been a pleasure having you on the Lifestyle Hub podcast today. Most importantly, where can we find you on socials for those wanting to stay up to date with all things Sebastian Bates and the Warrior Academy? Yeah, so thank you so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure. Best way to find me, seb.bates on Instagram. Go to sebastianbates.com. The Warrior Academy podcast, I do about 5 or 6 podcasts every week. Great guests, you're one of them. So if you haven't seen Jason's, that'll be coming out soon as well. And yeah, if you're interested in actually joining the Warrior Academy or learning more about what we're doing, you can go to warrioracademy.ae and yeah, find out more from the team. Mate, thank you so much. Guys, that's a wrap. Another enriching episode concludes. Be sure to follow Seb on his social platforms. And until next time, I'll catch you later.